I want you to notice the cluster of homes here. Just so you have an idea of what I'm going to talk to you about. Home ownership in the Philippines is completely different than what we see in the Western world, what some of my viewers might be used to. And this is important to understand. In the Philippines, the clusters of homes that I just showed you are not individual home properties. They are a collection of homes on one property. When lands were distributed or occupied, that's not the right term. When the people settled on lands and obtained titleship, ownership of those parcels of land, it would have started out with maybe a husband and a wife, first generation. Then they would have their offspring, and the first generation would die off. Second generation assume ownership of the title. And then as generations move on and new ones, you go from the few co-owners of the property now to multitudes, dozens. And this has been happening mostly since post Second World War, when titles were began record keeping. And this is all over the Philippines. This is part of the rural culture as well as inner city in Manila and other urban areas. So, whenever these ownerships are split up amongst families, it's what they call fragmentation. So, when one co owner of a property makes a decision on behalf of the others, then they are potentially going to have a conflict. So, in the case of, let's say, one co owner on a property has his or her family, spouse, children, and they are amongst other siblings with their offspring on one compound, several different homes, and they would have crop fields. So maybe one is into farming, so he utilizes the fields, operates business, maintains a living. The other ones on the property, the other siblings, co owners, may or may not be involved, may or may not share in the profits. It's not a big deal. Everybody gets along. And there's a lot of that goes on. So some might operate some other kind of a business, sorry store, or work elsewhere. And then you have the ones that live off of the compound, that relatives who may go abroad or live, you know, migrate elsewhere within domestically in the country. Now, if it comes to a point where, say, the farmer wants to expand his business into, say, a long term lease agreement with a company, then that complicates things, because then where he might tie the land up in an extended year lease, that requires unanimous consent, written consent from all of the co-owners. And as I explained earlier, when you go 2 or 3 generations deep, now you're chasing after people who may or may not be living on the compound, may or may not be living in the country, and they all have to unanimously agree to such a policy. Likewise, if one member is, even by themselves, living on the compound, the sole residents of the compound are a person with his family, and they decide that they want to cash in on the property. All of the other relatives have said, you know what, I we've had it with the rural life. We're moving on. So if that family living on the compound decides they want to, say, sell, they need liquidity, they need to move on. Well, this is a case where they need full unanimous consent signed off by every other co-owner, which they may or may not know where they are, so they have to chase them down. So you'll have dozens of relatives, all connected, co-owners, and on top of that, legitimate or illegitimate, doesn't matter. So this is the bureaucratic nightmare that poses, that comes up for anyone who wants to manage the decisions of a property. And it's also a nightmare for townships, municipalities, barangays to keep these records, do their research, and then any other corporate entity who wants to deal with the compound, they need to get all this in order before they put pen to paper, ink. You know. Now, having said that, there are plenty of cases in the Philippines where people have successfully sold properties. People come in, they want to buy property, they they have a deal, they go ahead, they close it. It's surrendered, the other person comes in, everything's fine. And they never get the title. They never obtain the title because it's next to impossible for the selling party to get that information, because they'll know of immediate relatives, but then after a few generations, they don't know. There's other ones that are still part of that ownership. Then, without understanding that key element, people who come here to the Philippines and don't understand that fundamental truth, may enter a purchase agreement with a Filipino, Filipina, fully confident that they're getting their dream property, and this can be land that's not even cultivated, just unused land. That land will have gone through generations of fragmentation ownership. So word spreads within the Filipino community. Someone gets wind that a certain parcel of land has been sold, and they say, "Excuse me, that's land that I own, or I'm entitled to compensation." So naturally, they question the transaction. They go to authorities who do their due diligence, and all of a sudden, the foreigner with the Filipina spouse reach a roadblock. And unfortunately, in social media, that's called a scam. And it's not necessarily a scam. Let me explain. That happens everywhere. It's a universal thing. It happens in the Western world. There are people who domestically, it happens between husband and wife. The husband wants an amicable separation from the wife. The wife expects compensation from as many assets as possible, and the husband will hide assets, shelter them. It happens in estate planning. Weak estate planning leaves opportunity for people to see that they're not getting their fair share. So conflicts arise between relatives, and it's human nature. People will see that a decision was made on their behalf that they never consented, and will naturally want some sort of compensation. Now, I'm not saying that all situations are not scams. There could be some intentional. There might be. I don't know. But I'm just cautioning against that general conclusion. There's always risks involved, and it's more so in a country like the Philippines, where purchasing a parcel of land, property, is totally different, night and day, totally different from the world that we're used to. That's it for today.